Welcome to the Manhood Podcast. A little bit of hype music to get us going. Title of the song is Never Shall Forget by John P. Key. How appropriate when we're talking about forgiveness. Do you forgive and forget? Do you forgive and hold on to that thing? Let's talk about it.
Never shall forget what you've done for me by John P. Key. When you forgive, do you forgive and forget? Or are you one of those people who say, I'll forgive, but I'll never forget? Let's talk about it. Walking around with unforgiveness is like walking around with a backpack full of rocks, weighing down on you, holding you back, causing you to use much more energy just to go through the course of a day. Maybe better than just walking around with it would be trying to swim with 30 pounds worth of rocks on your back. I mean, unless you are an extreme sports person or maybe a Navy SEAL or something, that's not typically what you want to do. Well, many of us walk around through life with unforgiveness. We haven't forgiven a friend who stabbed us in the back. We haven't forgiven our mother, our father, our brother, our sister. We're not speaking to them. We've kind of cut them off because they did something to us. Basically, they didn't live up to our expectations. I want to use a term called mannerisms, and I'll be using them throughout the podcast. Today's mannerism is about success. Success is meeting or exceeding expectations. All right? Success is meeting or exceeding expectations. You had expectations, and we're going to talk about fathers and forgiving fathers. You had expectations for your father. Don't know where you got them from, because when you were born, you couldn't talk, you couldn't communicate. There were no terms set. You didn't have a contract with your dad that said he would provide for you. He'd put a roof over your head. He put clothes on your back, diapers on your behind, Jordans on your feet. You didn't have a contract. You couldn't talk till you were about 2 years old. And even then, it was dad, dad, mom, mom. You could make certain sounds, maybe start to count, maybe start to make letters, but you did not have a contract. And who knows, your father may not have been there during that time. But you've developed some type of resentment towards them. As you got older, you had other expectations. Where did those expectations come from? Was it from watching television? Was it from watching other fathers, other kids whose fathers may have come home and started playing ball with them, or taking them to the park, or doing other things with their kids? And you say, well, my dad doesn't do that. I'm disappointed in him. Maybe those expectations came from what you heard being said about him. Your mother, your grandmother, uncles. Somebody was saying something that, hey, this man is not doing what he was supposed to do. And that's what made you realize, hey, he's not doing what he's supposed to do. I'm disappointed. I'm hurt. There's been a breach of contract. In business, you have contracts. It clearly outlines, I'm going to do A, B, and C. You're going to do X, Y, and Z. If you don't live up to your end of the contract, usually a breach of contract has occurred. You either break that contract, you can sue for damages because of that contract, but the contract is typically broken. Well, I don't know if you have a contract with your dad. Do you have a contract with your mom, your brother, your sister, your aunt, your uncle? Typically in family relationships, we don't have those contracts, but there are expectations set. Different families, different cultures, it's set in different ways, but there are expectations. Maybe your father put his hands on you at some point in time. Maybe he did even worse than that. He violated you in some way, shape, or form. And you're holding that resentment against him. Maybe he didn't show up for your piano recital, for your dance recital. He didn't show up for your baseball game, your football game, your basketball game. He didn't show up for a banquet. He didn't show up to see you win an award, and many awards maybe. and you have resentment, pain, hurt, disappointment, that is what you're carrying around. That's what's in that backpack. Hurt, pain, disappointment, bitterness, resentment. We need to be able to get rid of that. He hasn't met his expectations. Well, what were his expectations the night you were conceived? Was he expecting to have a child from that encounter? He may have been married to your mother. He may not have been married to your mother. He may have had a whole nother relationship outside of who your mother is. It gets to be very, very complicated. But did he lay down with the intent of having a child? You know, if you take a man over a period of life, maybe sexually active for 50 years, and that might be a long number, it might be a short number. You can adjust it any way you like. But just for argument's sake, we're going to say he's been sexually active for 50 years. And in 52 weeks in a year, he had sex twice a week. I know some of y'all are saying, oh no, I have sex much more than that. I couldn't survive. Whatever. We're using these numbers. You can put your own numbers in there. But 50 years, 52 weeks a year, twice a week, comes out to be 5,200 times this man has had intercourse. Did he plan on having 5,200 children? Probably not. I think the average in the U.S. is 2.5 children. I have 4 children. If I took the 4 divided by 5,200, it comes out to 0.08%. 0.08% of the time that you actually conceived a child. And I don't know if each one of those times you actually planned on having a child. We'll leave that up to another podcast if you plan on having a child or not. But his expectation may not have been to have a child. He may not have been prepared to have a child. And we've talked about being a boy and having a child, not really ready to be a father, but you've been thrust into this. And I know the mother had the same expectations. Listen, they laid down for recreation, for entertainment, for intimacy. Sexual intercourse is a human need. We have a need for love, for pleasure, for ecstasy. It's not necessarily every time we're laying down to procreate. And you can procreate, produce a child, or recreate for entertainment purposes when you lay down and have intercourse. So not every time your expectations are to have a child. Now, mind you, I'm not making excuses for a dad. We're just looking at the contract. We talked about the contract, ABC, XYZ. This is what's happening. Now, the mother had the same expectations. She was not planning on having a child. She became pregnant. What is it about a mother that within that 9-month span, or within a very short period of time of knowing that she has conceived, she changes? Her body changes. Her hormones change. A woman typically menstruates, she gestates, and she lactates. So her body does. And those are the things that cause her to communicate or interact with that child. Women are socialized, nurtured to be mothers. Little girl has a doll. She's walking around with a doll in her arm, taking care of it. They got dolls that eat food, that pee and poop. You put diapers on them and everything else. And at a very young age, that seed, that impetus to become a mother has been put in them. How many boys, think about it, how many toys have you seen on the marketplace for boys to generate that nurturing, that paternal care instinct that's within them? I don't know of many, if any at all. And when we see a boy playing with a doll, we have a whole lot to say about it. Men are socialized when it comes to this whole piece of conceiving a child to impregnate women. Their bodies don't change once they're expecting a child. An expected father does not change. Now, myself personally, my life changed drastically when my wife, my late wife, conceived our first child. She was very sick for like the first 7 months, throwing up all day long, not just morning sickness, but all day long. And if I was not at work, if I were with her, she would call me into the bathroom to hold her hand while she was throwing up. I started to get the change that was happening in our lives. Most men don't have that. In all types of situations, you could be living with the woman that you're having a baby with. You could be married to the woman you're having a baby with. You could be living separately from this person, so you don't experience all of these things. Man, if you're expecting a baby, you better act like you're expecting a baby. Let your mindset start to change so that your expectations start to change. You need to start preparing for that child. But going back to the forgiveness piece, if you haven't changed, if you haven't prepared for that child, this is one of your 5,200 times that you were not expecting to have a child. We subtract 4 from that. Was at 5,196 times you were planning on having intercourse and not having a child. The other 4, in my case, I had children, but 5,196 times. This is one of those times that you expected that to be that way, but it was not. A child was conceived. Now you have this child who has expectations for you. Your expectations were not to have a child. We have a breach of contract. Somebody's feelings is going to get hurt. And it's usually the child. You may not be there as the child is growing up for many reasons. You may not be there because of decisions that you've made. You may not be there because of decisions that the mother has made. It could be a combination of the two. You could have come to an agreement together that you weren't going to be in this child's life. But for some reason you weren't there, and it built up anger, it built up resentment. And you can fill in the blank as to why you have this bitterness, this resentment, toward this disappointment from your father. And then you have to figure out why. Once you fill in that blank, I was watching a movie the other day. The movie was A Time to Kill. Samuel L. Jackson, Ashley Judd, Kiefer Sutherland, Donald Sutherland, Matthew McConaughey. Excellent movie. One of my favorite movies of all time. But I watched it, I don't know, this is probably, 10th, 15th time I've ever watched that movie. And I heard something that I had not heard in the previous times. Matthew McConaughey's character, who is playing a defense attorney, says this. He says, I don't believe in forgiveness nor rehabilitation. A defense attorney who doesn't believe, think about that. Defense attorney who's maybe pleading for his defendant to get a certain amount of time in jail, the least amount of time as possible, because at that point he will be rehabilitated, does not believe in rehabilitation, nor does he believe in forgiveness. But what that statement supposes or presupposes is that forgiveness is for the offender. Forgiveness is for the person, that criminal who offended somebody, the person who disappointed you, the person who broke the contract, although it was an unwritten contract. Forgiveness is not for them. Forgiveness is for you. We talked about that breach of contract. If somebody breached the contract and you sued them, you could go to court and get money for damages. And the person who did not, the offender of that contract, doesn't get anything. It is the person who held their end of the contract. Typically, as a child, even as an adult, we have expectations for our fathers and our parents. And many times they don't live up to them. But as a child, you really had no ability to not live up to your end. You did the things you were supposed to do. It was the adult who did not live up to it. You're the one who deserves payment for damages. And that payment comes in the form of forgiveness. Forgiving them releases you. It's not for them, it's strictly for you. Unforgiveness is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to die. Remember back in high school, I had a friend who was upset with me. We were in the same classes. We talked all the time. We went from class to class. We were in the same classes all the time. They were upset with me about something that I had done. They got mad. They got bitter. They got very short with me, stopped speaking to me, but never told me why they were upset. I'm walking around without a care in the world. Like everything is all right. Something's wrong with them. I'm good. And turned out they got sick. They went to the hospital. I came to visit them in the hospital. And while they were in the hospital bed, they lived. Everything was fine. They explained to me why they were upset with me. But I didn't know. They were drinking poison, hoping that I would die. They were mad, using a lot of energy in unforgiveness. I didn't even know I needed to apologize to them because they never said anything. So forgiveness can be that way. And we get in places with our parents or with someone who we need to forgive, and we say, you know what? I'm just cutting them off. I'm not speaking to them anymore. I just won't have anything to do with them anymore. I don't need them. Sometimes you have people that you need to forgive, but they never ask for forgiveness. Those are the hardest ones to forgive. When they never ask for it, when they never show any contrition, when they never show that they're disappointed. And sometimes a man's pride, a father's pride, will keep him from saying, hey, I'm sorry. I hope that you and I, as we're discussing this and listening to the podcast, we're not that person. That we'll find it in our hearts to say, hey, son, daughter, I'm sorry. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. I wasn't there. I should have been there. You're going to release your child. If you love your child, you want to release your child from that. I've been in a situation where someone had done something to me, hurt me deeply, but never apologized. They walked away and never spoke to me again. To this day, haven't spoken to me. But I had to find it in my heart, find a way to forgive them, not for them, but for me. So I wouldn't have to carry that burden around anymore. True forgiveness. We say we'll forgive, but we won't forget. We'll forgive, but I won't give them another chance. Is that the way you want to be forgiven? Think about it. You did something to offend someone. You see the error of your ways. You apologize. You ask for forgiveness. They say, I forgive you, but they never treat you the same anymore. Or they constantly throw it up in your face. When things aren't going well between the two of you, remember when. And is that the type of forgiveness that you want in your life? Listen, nobody wants their worst moments thrown back in their face. So I don't agree that that's true forgiveness. Now, there are many people who say that I'll forgive, but I won't forget. I'm not trying to convince you of that. I believe that you should forgive and forget. Matter of fact, I saw a meme one time on social media, and it said, true forgiveness is somebody stabs you in the back, you pull out the knife, give them back the knife, and are able to turn your back to them again. That's true forgiveness. Now, I'm not advocating for you to walk back into an abusive relationship. Again, it was a meme, so can't explain everything. What should happen in a situation is you forgive someone and they change their behavior. If they haven't changed their behavior and you give them back that knife, brace yourself because that knife is coming right back in your back again. All right? But you want to see change behavior. Sometimes you will, sometimes you will not. But you have to be okay with that. You can't control what that other person does. You can control what you do and how you feel. We want to get to a place where we are free from the burden of unforgiveness. And there are 4 steps to getting there. The first step is acknowledge the pain and hurt. Acknowledge the pain and hurt. Many times we walk around saying, you know what, I don't care. It doesn't bother me. I'm not thinking about that anymore. It's not true. Because maybe you're a woman and you don't trust men because of what your father has done. Maybe you're a young man and you can't love your child the way you should and do for your child the way you should because your father didn't do for you. You're carrying hurt, pain, resentment, bitterness into the next generation. You're setting a pattern. And we talked about patterns, I believe, in episode 2 of the podcast, that fathers set up patterns. Some patterns need to be broken and destroyed before you carry them into the next generation. I don't want anything that has affected me in my past, my fears, my pain, my hurt, to affect my children. And you got to be honest with yourself, be able to look in the mirror and say, hey, this is affecting me today. So the first thing is acknowledge the pain, acknowledge the hurt, see how it's affecting you, and make a conscious decision that you're not going to pass it on to anybody else. You may have to relive it, reflect upon it, even empathize with the person who's offended you. Not making excuses for it, okay? Not making excuses at all. And I'm going to do a podcast called If Semen Were C Notes, talking about being responsible in that 5,196 times that you had intercourse. Many times we put that on the woman, but that's for another podcast. But today, let's empathize with that father. Hey, he hadn't planned on being a dad, and maybe he wasn't indoctrinated into it. I know someone who did not find out that they had fathered a child till that child was 16 years old. 16, he had no idea. Yeah, he knew he was with the mother, but he didn't know that a child was born out of that for 16 years. He didn't know. Empathize with him. That child grew up without. Now, who is she blaming? The child, who is she blaming? Is it blaming the mother for not contacting the father, blaming the father for not knowing and being responsible? Not to make excuses, but to empathize. And there are many, many stories like that. I know another man who sought out his father, who he had not known till he was 35 years old, in his mid-30s. He said, you know what? I want to know who my father is. He looked around, did some research, found his father, introduced to the father's family and everything. It becomes complicated, very complicated. The father's married, has a wife who did not know about this child. He has siblings that he did not know about. They now need to accept him and blend him into the family. A whole lot of things are going on. But we want to empathize with that. Not excuse them. Empathize. Understand where they're coming from. Many times, and I've talked about this in the first 2 episodes, we become fathers before we are prepared to be a father. We haven't become men. We're not prepared to provide for a child. We're not prepared to protect a child and the mother of that child. We're not mature enough to be a promise keeper. to say what we mean and mean what we say and then follow through with it. So there's some immaturity. I know myself, I had my first two kids when I was young. When I got older, I had two more children. I was a better father to those younger two kids than I was to the older two because I was more mature. Mind you, I did what I needed to do, a lot of good things, but I could have been better. I always want to get better at whatever you're doing. Then in forgiveness, there has to be, it's complex. The relationships get to be very, very complex, especially over time. Maybe you haven't spoken to this person, the mother hasn't spoken to them, whatever it may be. You really need to understand, what does working it out, forgiving them, really look like? Does that mean that, you all go into family reunions together, you're going fishing together, y'all buddy? Or does it mean that you're cordial and you start developing this new relationship? What does it really look like, that forgiveness? Sometimes a father is not there, not because of decisions that he or she has made. Decisions that he has made, but because of decisions that the mother may have made. I was watching a movie the other day. The mother had told her son that she did not know who his father was. He was, 18, 19, 20 years old. And the mother decided to send the son to live with the father. Think about it. You're 19 years old. You're told, I don't know who your father is. Then all of a sudden, your mother's on the phone, packing your bags, sending you to go live with this man that you do not know. What is that relationship like? What does that look like over the long haul? What would you like it to be once you have forgiven that person? And the final step, we talked about acknowledging the pain, reliving it, reflecting it, empathize, defining what it is to work it out. The final step is to remove any resentment, any anger. Take that backpack off your back. Be free. Be the best person that you can be without carrying around that load. Listen, unforgiveness and bitterness will cause you to have high blood pressure. It will cause you to physically be sick, will cause migraines, all types of things that are happening in your body because you haven't forgiven this person. You don't want to be that person. It'll affect the way you interact with your spouse. It'll affect the way you interact with your children. It may affect the way you interact on your job. Your children seeing that, it will affect them as well. You want to be able to say, I forgive you. Not for you, but for me. So that I can go on and be the best person that I can be. On July 10th at 4 p.m., we're going to have a live. Should be 3 episodes posted of the podcast by then. You can kind of get a flavor of the things we're talking about and where we're going with it. I'd like to hear from you. If you have questions about any of the first 3 episodes, if there's something that sparked an idea or a thought within you that you want to go, please join me on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube. We're getting terrific responses. Went on YouTube, I think about 2 weeks ago. Probably as many downloads on YouTube as I have on all of the other podcasts, the iHeartRadio, TuneIn, Amazon, and their Spotify. There are a couple of others that we're working on, still working on Apple. They take a little while to get there, but just as many on YouTube as anywhere else. So you can listen to the podcast whenever you want, however you deem fit. I was watching it in my car the other day. I was pretty proud of myself listening to myself on the podcast. I think I was on TuneIn listening. Listen, thank you for listening. Tell a friend about it. Invite someone else to listen, especially someone who's struggling, maybe a new father, maybe someone who did not have a father in their lives. Have them listen to this about forgiveness. Sunday, we'll have some interaction. And I look forward to communicating with you and talking to you about even more. Have a great day.